I thought I was inheriting a billion-dollar empire until my uncle emptied my trust to zero and forced me into a job that hides a deadly 40-year-old secret. I watched the steam rise from my Earl Grey, the silence in the mahogany-paneled office thick enough to choke on. Across from me sat Chloe, my only niece, tapping her manicured, lilac-colored nails against the leather armrest of her chair. She was 24, dressed in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my first 3 cars combined, and she was checking her reflection in her phone screen every 30 seconds. To her, this meeting was a formality, a victory lap before she officially inherited the keys to the kingdom I had spent 40 years building from nothing. I remember when Chloe was a little girl, before the designer labels and the influencer lifestyle. She used to sit on my lap and ask for stories about how I started a logistics company with nothing but a rusted truck and a stack of maps. But as the business grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire, Chloe's curiosity about the work vanished, replaced by an insatiable hunger for the results. She didn't want to know how the gears turned. She just wanted to know how much gold they spat out. "Uncle David, can we speed this up?" Chloe sighed, not looking away from her phone. "I have a tasting at 1. The caterers for my summer kickoff party are being incredibly difficult about the caviar selection. And honestly, Mr. Henderson's office smells like old paper and despair." Mr. Henderson, my lawyer for 3 decades, didn't look up from his files. He knew Chloe. He'd seen the receipts for her emergency expenditures, the chartered jets to Ibiza, the penthouse rentals in Manhattan, the endless stream of jewelry that she needed for her brand. He also knew what was inside the manila folder sitting on his desk. "Patience is a virtue, Chloe," I said softly. My voice sounded tired, even to my own ears. A recent health scare had forced my hand earlier than I'd planned, but in a way, it was a blessing. It gave me the chance to see the truth before the dirt was tossed over my coffin. "Virtue doesn't pay for a Birkin, Uncle," she chirped, finally setting her phone down and flashing me a bright, rehearsed smile. "But look, I've already spoken to the architects. Once the trust transfers, I'm thinking of gutting the estate in the Hamptons. It's so traditional. We need more glass, more light. Very new Dubai, you know?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the ghost of the sweet child she used to be, buried under layers of ego and unearned privilege. I had done this to her. By shielding her from the struggle, I had robbed her of the strength that comes from it. I had given her everything, and in doing so, I had given her nothing of value. "The Hamptons house isn't yours yet, Chloe," I reminded her. "Well, yet is a very temporary word," she giggled, leaning forward. "Mr. Henderson, please. The suspense is killing my followers. I promised them a big announcement today." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to me for one final confirmation. I nodded, a slow, heavy movement. He opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't the thick stack of deeds and stock certificates Chloe was expecting. It was a summary of accounts. "Chloe," Mr. Henderson began, his voice professional and cold, "as per your uncle's instructions, we have completed the mid-year audit and the restructuring of the Davenport Family Trust." Chloe's eyes lit up. She practically vibrated in her seat. "And what's the bottom line? Did the tech stocks bounce back like you said?" "The bottom line, mister," Henderson said, pausing to adjust his glasses, "is that the primary trust account, along with the liquid assets from the sale of the Davenport Logistics Holdings and the various real estate portfolios, currently holds a balance of 0. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't thick. It was sharp. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Chloe's smile didn't fade all at once. It flickered like a dying light bulb before her face went completely blank. "I'm sorry," she said, a nervous laugh escaping her throat. "I think I misheard you. 0? Like 00? That's impossible. My uncle is a billionaire, the logistics king. You're joking. This is a prank for my YouTube channel, isn't it? Uncle David, tell him he's being a riot." I didn't say a word. I just watched her. "Uncle David." Her voice rose an octave, the polished veneer beginning to crack. "Why aren't you laughing? There's over $400 million in that trust. I saw the statement last year. I've already signed the lease on the showroom in Soho. I have deposits down. People are expecting me to launch my line." "The money is gone, Chloe," I said, my voice steady. "Every cent of the liquid capital has been moved. The properties have been deeded over to a new entity. The stocks have been liquidated and transferred." Chloe stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. Her face, usually so carefully composed, was contorted in a mix of fury and genuine terror. "Gone? Gone where? Who stole it? We have to call the police. We have to sue someone. You can't just lose a fortune like that." "Nobody stole it," I said. "I gave it away." She stared at me as if I had just started speaking a foreign language. Her hands began to shake, her expensive rings catching the dim light of the office. You gave it away? To who? Why? What about me? What about my inheritance? What about my life?" "I've spent a long time thinking about legacy, Chloe," I said, leaning back. "About what it means to truly help people. I realized that keeping that money locked in a trust for someone who doesn't understand the value of a dollar wasn't an act of love. It was an act of sabotage. So I decided to put it to its true charitable purpose." "Charitable purpose?" Chloe shrieked, the words sounding like a slur in her mouth. "You gave my life to a charity? You threw away my future so you could have your name on a hospital wing? I'm your family. I'm your only blood. How could you be so selfish?" She began to pace the small room, her heels clicking like gunfire. "My fortune is gone? My fortune is gone?" she kept repeating, her voice cracking. "I have nothing. I have a credit card bill that's due on Friday that's more than most people make in a year. I have a lifestyle to maintain. You can't do this. It's my money." "It was never your money, Chloe," I said firmly. "It was mine. And now it belongs to the foundation. But you're not understanding, dear. I didn't just give it to a random organization." Chloe stopped pacing and glared at me, her eyes red with tears of rage. "I don't care where it went. I want it back. I'll sue you. I'll have you declared incompetent. You're old. You're losing your mind." "I'm quite lucid, I assure you," I said. "And if you'll listen for 1 second, you'll realize that I haven't left you with absolutely nothing. There is one clause. One way for you to regain a portion of what you think you've lost, but it requires you to fulfill the true charitable purpose I've designed for the Davenport name." Chloe wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her desperation finally outweighing her anger. "Fine. Whatever. What is it? Do I have to cut a ribbon? Go to a gala? What's the catch?" I looked at Mr. Henderson, who pulled a second, much smaller envelope from his drawer. He handed it to Chloe. "Inside that envelope," I said, "is your new life. You start tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. in Chloe. If you miss even one day, the remaining assets, the house you live in, the car you drive, the clothes on your back, will be seized immediately." Chloe snatched the envelope, her fingers trembling as she ripped it open. She pulled out a small, laminated ID card and a single sheet of instructions. As she read it, the color drained from her face until she was as white as a sheet. "No," she whispered, looking at the ID card. "No, you can't be serious. You want me to go there?" I stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. "The car is waiting outside to take you to your new apartment. It's a studio in the city. Your designer bags are already being packed and sent to a secure storage facility. You'll get them back when you earn them." "Uncle David, please," she begged, catching my sleeve as I walked toward the door. "I don't know how to do this. I've never worked a day in my life. You're sending me to the lions." I paused at the door and looked back at her. "No, Chloe, I'm sending you to the place where I started. If you survive it, you'll understand why the money had to go. If you don't..." I let the sentence hang in the air. As I walked out, I heard her scream of frustration, but I didn't stop. I had one more stop to make. a stop that would reveal the real reason I had emptied the bank accounts, a reason that had nothing to do with teaching my niece a lesson, and everything to do with a secret I had been keeping for 40 years, a secret that was currently waiting for me in a rundown community center on the edge of town. The studio apartment was located in a part of the city Chloe had only ever seen through the tinted windows of a chauffeured SUV. It smelled of stale cabbage and industrial-grade pine cleaner. The wallpaper was peeling in rhythmic curls, like scorched skin, and the radiator hummed with a violent metallic clanking that made sleep impossible. She spent her first night huddled on a twin mattress that felt like it was stuffed with gravel, staring at the laminated ID card on the laminate nightstand. Davenport Community Outreach, kitchen staff /level 1. "He's lost it," she whispered to the shadows, her voice trembling. "He's actually lost his mind." She had tried to call her friends, her stylist, her manager, anyone who could help, but her phone had been replaced with a prepaid burner with only 3 numbers programmed into it: Mr. Henderson, the outreach center, and her uncle. When she'd tried to log into her Instagram to blast David's insanity to her 2 million followers, she found her accounts frozen, flagged for unauthorized access by the Davenport legal team. She was a ghost in a designer cage that was rapidly shrinking. At 5:15 a.m., the burner phone's alarm shrieked. Chloe groaned, her body aching from the literal and metaphorical hardness of her new life. She dressed in the only clothes she'd been provided, a pair of stiff denim work pants and a gray polo shirt with the foundation's logo. No Chanel, no silk, just the scratchy reality of cotton poly blend. When she arrived at the St. Jude's community hub, the sun hadn't even finished rising. The street was lined with shadows, men and women huddled in doorways, the very people Chloe had spent her life ignoring. "You're late," a voice boomed as she stepped through the heavy steel doors. A man stood there, clutching a clipboard. He was built like a retired linebacker, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked like they had seen everything and found most of it wanting. "I'm Marcus. You must be the intern David sent over." "I'm his niece," Chloe corrected, trying to summon a shred of her old authority. "And this is all a huge mistake. If you could just give me a desk and maybe some coffee." "Coffee is for the guests," Marcus interrupted, pointing toward the industrial kitchen. "And your desk is the prep station. There are 80 pounds of potatoes that aren't going to peel themselves. Get a hairnet on. You're behind schedule." As Chloe stood there, frozen in horror, I was only a few blocks away, sitting in the back of a nondescript sedan. I watched the entrance of the center through the rain-streaked window. My chest felt tight, a familiar pressure that the doctors had warned me about. "Is she inside?" I asked. "She's inside, sir," my driver, Elias, replied. He had been with me since the beginning, the only person who knew the full scope of what I was doing. But the others are starting to ask questions. The board of the old company. They're not happy about the liquidation. They think you've hidden the money to avoid the upcoming merger audit. "Let them think what they want," I murmured. "The money is where it needs to be. Is Clara here yet?" "She's in the office. She doesn't know you're coming." I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my lungs. I walked into the side entrance of the center, avoiding the main hall where Chloe was likely currently struggling with a vegetable peeler. I made my way to the small, cramped office at the back of the building. Clara was there, hunched over a ledger. She was 70 now, her hands gnarled by arthritis, but her eyes were still the same piercing blue I remembered from 40 years ago. When I pushed the door open, she didn't look up. "The delivery was short 2 crates of milk, David," she said, her voice raspy. "And the roof in the pantry is leaking again. I don't care how many billions you have, you can't buy dry weather." "I didn't come to talk about the roof, Clara," I said, sitting in the wooden chair across from her. She finally looked up, her gaze softening as she saw the paleness of my face. "You look like hell, David. The charitable purpose is taking its toll on you." "It's almost done," I said. "The assets have been moved. The trust is empty. Chloe is in the kitchen." Clara stiffened. You brought her here? After everything? David, that's dangerous. If she finds out the truth about why this place exists, about what happened in '84, she'll never forgive you. Neither will the people you're trying to protect. She has to know, I insisted. The fortune was built on a lie, Clara. I can't die leaving her that lie as her only inheritance. She needs to see what we cost these people. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Chloe was reaching her breaking point. Her hands were slick with starch, her knuckles raw. Every time she tried to stop, Marcus appeared like a vengeful spirit barking orders. This is beneath me, she finally snapped, throwing a half-peeled potato into the sink. Do you know who I am? My uncle built this city. The kitchen went silent. The other volunteers, mostly locals who lived in the surrounding tenements, stopped and stared at her. A woman at the next station, someone Chloe's age but with skin toughened by a life of hard labor, leaned over. Your uncle didn't build this city, honey, the girl said quietly. He bought it. There's a difference. And if you think you're too good to feed the people he stepped on to get his throne, then the door is right there. But Marcus told us if you leave, the funding for the new medical wing gets pulled. Chloe's eyes widened. What? He's holding a hospital hostage because of me? Not just a hospital, Marcus said, stepping into the light. The entire neighborhood. Your uncle tied every cent of the new foundation's payout to your satisfactory performance and integration into the community. If you quit, the money doesn't go to charity. It goes back to the state in a legal deadlock that'll take 20 years to clear. These people will starve because you didn't want to get your hands dirty. Chloe felt a cold pit of dread open in her stomach. It wasn't just a lesson, it was a ransom. Her uncle hadn't given the money away to be kind. He had used it to trap her. But as she looked around the kitchen, her eyes landed on a framed photograph on the wall. It was an old, grainy black and white photo of a warehouse fire. Underneath it was a list of names, a memorial. She walked toward it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She recognized the logo on the burning building in the photo. It wasn't the Davenport Logistics logo, but it was similar. It was the company my uncle had bought out to start his empire. She scanned the list of names of those who had perished. Near the bottom, her breath hitched. Clara Vance. Marcus Vance, Jr. Chloe turned around, her face ghostly. She looked at Marcus, then back at the photo. Marcus. This fire. My uncle always said he started with one truck. He said he bought a struggling business and turned it around. Marcus walked over, his expression unreadable. He didn't buy it, Chloe. He insured it, and then it burned. He got the payout, and we got the ashes. Just then, the office door at the back of the kitchen flew open. I stumbled out, clutching my chest, my face gray. Clara was right behind me, shouting for help. "David!" she cried. But before anyone could reach me, a heavy-set man in a dark suit, someone Chloe recognized as one of my former board members, burst through the front entrance of the hub, flanked by 2 police officers. "David Davenport," the man yelled, pointing a finger at me. "You're under arrest for grand larceny and the systematic embezzlement of the Davenport shareholders' funds. We've traced the transfers, David. You didn't give this money to charity. You laundered it." Chloe looked from me, collapsing on the floor, to the police, to Marcus, who was now looking at me with a sudden, murderous flash of realization. "Laundered it," Marcus whispered, his hand tightening around a heavy kitchen knife. "David, where's the money really?" The kitchen of the street. Jude's community hub, which had felt like a prison of steam and starch only moments ago, suddenly transformed into a crime scene. I watched, paralyzed, as my Uncle David, the man I'd spent my life alternating between idolizing and resenting, clutched his chest and slid down the industrial refrigerator, his breath coming in shallow, wet gasps. "David! David, look at me!" Clara screamed, her voice cracking as she knelt beside him on the greasy floor. She ignored the police officers, her focus entirely on the man who was currently the center of a storm he had created. I wanted to move. I wanted to run to him, to scream for an ambulance, to tell him I was sorry for being so shallow. But I was anchored to the spot by the words of the man in the charcoal gray suit, Arthur Sterling. He was the vice chairman of Davenport Logistics, a man I'd seen at a dozen Christmas parties, always smiling, always handing me a gift card or a piece of jewelry. Now his face was a mask of cold, predatory triumph. "Laundered?" I managed to choke out, the word feeling like ash in my mouth. "What are you talking about? He gave it to the foundation. He told me the trust was empty because it was being used for this." I gestured wildly at the peeling walls, the soup line, the memorial on the wall. Sterling let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "This place is a front, Chloe. Don't be so naive. Your uncle didn't just move the liquid assets. He channeled $400 million through a series of offshore shells, eventually landing them in the Davenport Community Outreach accounts. But here's the trick. The foundation isn't a nonprofit. It's a registered holding company. And do you know who the sole beneficiary of that holding company is?" He stepped closer, his expensive cologne clashing violently with the smell of boiled potatoes. "You, Chloe. He put the stolen funds in your name. He didn't leave you with nothing. He left you with a paper trail that leads directly to a federal prison cell." I felt the room tilt. My legs turned to water. "No, that's not true. He said I had to work here. He said I had to earn it." "A perfect cover," Sterling sneered, turning his gaze toward the officers. If the SEC came knocking, David could claim he was mentoring his niece in the family's philanthropic endeavors. Meanwhile, the money is sitting in accounts that only you have the digital keys to. He didn't save his legacy, Chloe. He laundered his theft through you. A low growl came from the corner of the room. Marcus, the man who had been barking orders at me all morning, was standing by the knife rack. His face was a map of old scars and new fury. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking at my uncle, who was now barely conscious, his eyes fluttering as Clara desperately tried to find a pulse. "You used us," Marcus said, his voice a vibrating bass that shook the very air. "You came here 40 years ago and burned the neighborhood for the insurance. And now you come back and use our foundation as a garbage bin for your stolen billions? You think we're just a line on a balance sheet?" "Marcus, please," Clara sobbed. "He's dying. Help me." "Let him," Marcus spat. He turned his eyes to me, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of true, unadulterated hatred. "And you're just like him. You come in here in your designer shoes, pretend to peel a few potatoes, all while you're sitting on enough blood money to buy and sell every person in this room 10 times over." "I didn't know," I screamed, the tears finally breaking through. "I thought I was poor. I thought he took it all." One of the police officers stepped forward, reaching for his handcuffs. "Ms. Davenport, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. And we'll need the envelope your uncle gave you this morning, the one with the ID card." I reached into the pocket of my scratchy work pants, my fingers brushing against the laminated card. My mind raced. If what Sterling said was true, if I was the beneficiary of a multi-billion-dollar fraud, then every word my uncle had said in that office was a lie. The true charitable purpose wasn't about teaching me a lesson, it was about making me the fall girl. But as my fingers closed around the card, I felt something else in the pocket. A small, hard object that hadn't been there before. I pulled it out slightly, just enough to see. It wasn't a key. It was a thumb drive, encased in a small plastic bag. Taped to the side of it was a tiny, handwritten note in my uncle's cramped script. "Don't trust the board." The fire was only the beginning. "Find the 13th floor instantly." My uncle's hand shot out, grabbing Clara's wrist with surprising strength. He gasped, his eyes snapping open, looking not at her, but directly at me. "Chloe," he wheezed, a thin trail of blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "The money, it's not in the accounts. Sterling, he's lying. Don't let them find the..." He broke into a violent coughing fit, his body racking with the effort. "Step back, ma'am!" the officer shouted at Clara, pushing her away to allow the paramedics, who had just burst through the doors, to reach him. Sterling moved toward me, his hand outstretched. "The envelope, Chloe. Give it to me. I'm the executor of the corporate estate. I can help you. I can make sure the blame stays with David." I looked at Sterling, then at the police, then at Marcus, who was watching me with eyes like flint. If I gave the envelope to the police, I was a suspect. If I gave it to Sterling, I was an accomplice. I don't have it," I lied, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. "I dropped it in the office. I must have left it with Mr. Henderson." Sterling's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe me. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "Listen to me, you spoiled little brat. Your uncle didn't just steal from the shareholders. He stole from people who don't go to the police, people who use much more permanent methods of litigation. If you don't give me the access codes to that foundation account in the next 5 minutes, you won't live long enough to see a courtroom." Behind him, the paramedics were lifting my uncle onto a stretcher. He was unconscious again, his face a mask of gray. "Wait!" I cried as they started to wheel him out. "Stay where you are, Miss Davenport," the officer commanded, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. In the chaos, no one noticed Marcus slipping away toward the back of the kitchen. No one noticed the smoke starting to curl from the vents in the ceiling. A sharp, high-pitched alarm began to blare. "Fire!" someone screamed. The kitchen, already a tinderbox of tension, erupted into a panic. The volunteers and guests scrambled for the exits. The police officers were momentarily distracted, trying to maintain order. Sterling gripped my arm, his fingers digging into my skin like talons. "The drive, Chloe. I saw you pull it out. Give it to me, or you burn with the building." I looked at the vents. The smoke wasn't accidental. It was coming from the basement, the very place where the Foundation's archives were kept. I wrenched my arm free and dived into the crowd, my heart set on one thing. I didn't head for the front door. I headed for the stairs. I had to know what was on the 13th floor of a building that only had 3 stories. But as I reached the basement door, I found it already kicked open. Standing in the darkness of the stairwell, illuminated by the orange glow of a growing fire, was Marcus. He wasn't putting out the fire, he was feeding it. And in his hand, he held a file folder with my name on it. "You want to know the true charitable purpose, Chloe?" Marcus asked, a terrifying smile spreading across his face. "It's not about the money, it's about the debt. And today, the Davenports are finally going to pay in full." He stepped back into the flames, beckoning me to follow. "Come on, Chloe, let's see if you're as good at surviving fires as your uncle was." The heat hit me like a physical blow, a wall of shimmering air that tasted of sulfur and scorched plastic. The basement stairs were a descent into a mechanical underworld, pipes hissing and the rhythmic thump-thump of the industrial boilers sounding like the heartbeat of a dying beast. "Marcus, stop!" I screamed, shielding my face from the embers dancing in the air. "If you burn this place, you burn the evidence. You'll never prove what he did." Marcus didn't turn around. He was a shadow against the orange glow, tossing handfuls of paper into a growing bonfire in the center of the archive room. "The evidence doesn't matter anymore, Chloe. Your uncle spent 40 years polishing a tombstone. This building, this foundation, it's all a monument to his guilt. He didn't build it to help us. He built it to hide us." I scrambled down the last few steps, my lungs burning. The thumb drive was a hot coal in my pocket. "Find the 13th floor." My uncle's words echoed in my mind, but the building was a squat 3-story brick structure. It was a riddle, a dying man's last cruel joke. "Sterling said he laundered the money through me," I shouted over the roar of the fire. "He said I'm the one going to prison. If you hate him so much, help me prove he's the one who lied." Marcus finally stopped. He turned, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, making him look like something ancient and vengeful. He held up a charred ledger. Sterling is a shark, but your uncle was the ocean. Do you know why this place is called St. Jude's, the patron saint of lost causes? Because David Davenport knew that after the fire in '84, we were all lost causes. He stepped toward me, the heavy kitchen knife still gripped in his hand. You think you're a victim? You've lived your life on the interest of our blood. Every vacation, every diamond, every summer kickoff party was paid for by the families who couldn't afford funerals because the insurance money went into your uncle's first warehouse. Suddenly, the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs groaned. Arthur Sterling stood there, silhouetted against the dim light of the kitchen above. He wasn't alone. 2 of his personal security detail were with him, silenced pistols drawn. "Enough melodrama!" Sterling called out, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "Marcus, put the knife down and walk away. This is corporate business now. And Chloe, dear, be a sensible girl. Give me the drive." "You set the fire, didn't you?" I whispered, looking from the rising smoke to the man in the suit. "You didn't want the police to see what was in the archives. You're not here for the money, you're here to bury the truth." Sterling smiled, a thin, bloodless curve of his lips. "The truth is a very expensive commodity. Your uncle was getting soft. His health scare made him sentimental. He wanted to confess, Chloe. He wanted to turn over 40 years of restructuring records to the authorities as his true charitable purpose. He was going to take the whole board down with him, including me." He began to descend the stairs, his shoes clicking on the metal treads. "But he made a mistake. He trusted you with the key. Now give it to me, or Marcus won't be the only one who doesn't survive this fire." Marcus looked at me, then at Sterling. For a second, the shared history of this neighborhood, the pain and the poverty, seemed to bridge the gap between us. He stepped in front of me, his massive frame shielding me from Sterling's line of sight. "The 13th floor, Chloe," Marcus hissed under his breath. "The old freight elevator, the panel behind the boiler, the code is the date of the fire." "What?" I stammered. "Go!" he roared, lunging at Sterling's men with a guttural scream. The basement erupted into chaos. Gunshots rang out, muffled by suppressors, echoing like dry twigs snapping. I didn't look back. I dived behind the massive, rusted hull of the central boiler. The air was thick with soot, and I could hear the sounds of a struggle, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. I found the freight elevator, a cage of iron bars and grease. Beside it, hidden behind a flap of loose insulation on the boiler, was a keypad. It was ancient, coated in a layer of grime. The date of the fire. I remembered the memorial on the wall upstairs. May 13th, 1984. I punched in 051384. The elevator didn't move. Instead, the floor beneath my feet shuddered. A section of the concrete, disguised as a drainage grate, slid back with a grinding screech. A narrow, steep set of stairs led even further down into the earth. I scrambled into the hole just as a bullet sparked against the iron bars of the elevator. I tumbled down the stairs, landing hard on a cold, tiled floor. Above me, the hatch slid shut, cutting off the roar of the fire and the screams of the fight. I was in a hallway of clinical, blinding white. It was a stark, terrifying contrast to the decay of the building above. The air here was filtered and cool, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive cologne. At the end of the hall was a single door with a digital screen. As I approached, the screen flickered to life. A camera lens zoomed in on my face. "Biometric scan complete," a synthetic voice chimed. "Welcome, Chloe Davenport. Accessing the 13th floor, the restitution protocol." The door hissed open. I stepped inside, and my breath caught. It wasn't an office. It wasn't a vault. It was a hospital room. The walls were lined with monitors, their rhythmic beeping the only sound in the room. In the center, surrounded by a forest of IV stands and life support equipment, lay a woman. She looked like a porcelain doll, her hair white and her skin almost translucent. I walked toward the bed, my heart in my throat. On the bedside table was a photo. It was a picture of my uncle as a young man standing next to this woman. They were both laughing, standing in front of the very warehouse that had burned down 40 years ago. A computer terminal on the desk beside the bed chirped, and a video file began to play. It was my uncle, filmed perhaps only a week ago. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "If you're seeing this, Chloe, then I am likely gone, and you've discovered the secret I've spent my life's fortune to keep alive. This is Clara's daughter, Sarah. She didn't die in the fire, as the records say, but she didn't escape it either. She has been in this coma for 40 years, a victim of the chemicals Sterling's father insisted we store illegally in that warehouse." I stared at the woman. This wasn't just a charity, it was a private illegal medical facility. "The true charitable purpose isn't just about Sarah," my uncle's image continued. "The thumb drive in your pocket contains the coordinates for the rest of them, the others who died. They aren't in graves, Chloe, they're—" The video cut to static as the room's lights flickered. A voice boomed over the intercom, but it wasn't the synthetic one. It was Arthur Sterling. "I knew you'd find the sublevel, Chloe, but you've made a terrible mistake. You've entered a pressurized oxygen environment." I looked up at the vents. A strange, sweet smell began to fill the room. "You see," Sterling's voice continued, crackling with a dark delight, "your uncle's restitution protocol required his death and your presence to activate the final transfer of funds. But he forgot one thing. I control the ventilation. In exactly 60 seconds, I'm going to trigger a spark. And this secret, this entire floor, will become the second Davenport fire." I lunged for the terminal, my fingers flying over the keys, trying to find a way out. But a new window popped up on the screen, a countdown clock in bright red, and beneath it, a live feed from the room next door. In the neighboring cell, behind a thick pane of glass, was Marcus. He was strapped to a chair, his eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't the fire he was looking at. He was staring at a figure standing in the corner of his room, a figure in a lab coat holding a syringe. The figure turned toward the camera, and I felt the world dissolve. It was Mr. Henderson. "Don't bother with the computer, Chloe," the lawyer said, his voice coming through the speakers. "The money was never for the families. It was for the research. Now give us the drive, or Marcus gets the first dose of the restorative serum." The countdown hit 10 seconds. The red numbers on the terminal flickered. 0005, 0004. The sweet, heavy scent of pure oxygen filled my lungs, a terrifying fuel for the spark Arthur Sterling was about to trigger. In the adjacent room, I saw through the glass as Mr. Henderson, the man who had read me bedtime stories when I was 6, pressed the tip of a needle against Marcus's neck. "Chloe, the drive!" Sterling's voice echoed through the vents, distorted by his own desperation. "Plug it into the primary port or watch him die before you burn." My hands were shaking, the plastic of the thumb drive slick with sweat. "Don't trust the board," my uncle had written. He knew they were coming. He knew the money was the bait, and I was the hook. I didn't plug it into the primary port. My eyes darted across the medical terminal next to Sarah's bed. There was a secondary slot labeled Emergency Restitution, Priority Alpha. I slammed the drive into the slot. The red countdown on the wall vanished, replaced by a single word in bright neon green, authorized. Suddenly, the speakers didn't hum with Sterling's voice. They boomed with the sound of 1,000 cascading chimes. On the monitors, rows of data began to scroll at light speed. It wasn't a ledger of stolen money. It was a distribution list. "What are you doing?" Henderson shrieked, dropping the syringe as the screens in his room began to flash. "The encryption! You're breaking the encryption!" "The true charitable purpose," I whispered, watching as the computer began to execute millions of microtransactions. My uncle hadn't hidden the money in a vault. He had turned the fortune into a smart algorithm. The second the drive was inserted into the medical sublevel, the $400 million didn't go to me. It didn't go to Sterling. It began to disperse in increments of $5,000 to the bank accounts of every person living in a 3-mile radius of the St. Jude's hub, the families of the fire victims, the workers my uncle had underpaid, the souls Marcus had been trying to protect. "No!" Sterling's scream of agony came through the intercom. "That's the corporate treasury. That's the merger capital. You've emptied the entire Davenport ecosystem." "It was never yours, Arthur," I yelled back, though I knew he couldn't stop it. "And it's not mine either." The doors to Marcus's room hissed open as the system-wide override took effect. Marcus, realizing the restraints had lost power, lunged forward. He was a blur of righteous fury, tackling Henderson before the lawyer could reach for a backup weapon. The white hallway was suddenly filled with a different sound, the heavy, rhythmic thud of the freight elevator. But it wasn't the police. The sub-level door was kicked off its hinges. Clara stood there, her face streaked with soot, clutching a heavy iron pipe. Behind her were 3 of the kitchen volunteers from upstairs. They hadn't run from the fire. They had followed the smoke to its source. "Sarah," Clara gasped, rushing past me to the bedside of her daughter. "She's alive, Clara," I said, my voice breaking. "The machines are on a separate backup. She's safe." Marcus emerged from the side room, dragging a disheveled and bruised Henderson by the collar. He looked at the monitors, watching the bank balances of his neighbors rise in real time on the scrolling feed. He looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with hatred, but with a profound, stunned realization. "You gave it all away," Marcus said. "Every cent." "I didn't give it away," I said, looking at the gray polo shirt I was wearing, the same one Marcus had mocked. "I just finally delivered the cargo. I'm a Davenport, remember. Logistics is in my blood." The building above us groaned. The fire was still raging, but the industrial suppression system in the sublevel had triggered, dousing the basement in a thick, fire-retardant foam. Within minutes, the real authorities arrived. Not the ones on Sterling's payroll, but the federal agents my uncle had alerted before he walked into that office meeting. They found Sterling in the basement trying to claw his way into a locked safe that was now empty. They found Henderson tied to a chair with his own expensive silk tie. And they found me, sitting on the cold floor next to Sarah's bed, holding my uncle's hand as the paramedics wheeled him in. He was barely conscious, but when he saw the transaction complete message on the screens, a small, weary smile touched his lips. "You understood," he whispered. "I understood, Uncle David," I said, tears blurring my vision. The fortune wasn't the money. It was the chance to fix the scales. 6 months later, the Hamptons estate had been sold. The Chanel suits were in a consignment shop in Soho, the proceeds going toward the St. Jude's Scholarship Fund. I lived in the same studio apartment, though I'd put up some better wallpaper. I walked toward the newly rebuilt Davenport Community Center. It wasn't a new Dubai glass monstrosity. It was a sturdy brick-and-mortar heart for the neighborhood. Marcus was at the front door wearing a suit that looked slightly too tight for his shoulders. He was the director now. "You're late for your shift, Chloe," he said, but he was smiling. "The subway was delayed," I said, holding up a box of supplies, "and I had to pick up the new ledgers. We have 300 kids signed up for the after-school program." "Your uncle is waiting inside," Marcus said, nodding toward the courtyard. I found David sitting in a wheelchair under a large oak tree. He was thinner, his voice a ghost of its former self, but his eyes were clear. Beside him sat Clara, and for the first time in 40 years, Sarah was in a wheelchair next to them. She wasn't awake yet, but her eyes were open, tracking the movement of the leaves. The research Henderson had been doing was monstrous, but the medical data my uncle had recovered had allowed legitimate doctors to finally begin the process of waking the victims of the fire. I sat on the bench next to my uncle. I was no longer the logistics queen. I was just Chloe. I had no Birkin, no followers, and a bank account that required me to check the price of eggs before I bought them. "Do you regret it?" David asked, his voice a rasp in the wind. "The fortune is gone, Chloe, truly gone. There is nothing left for you to inherit." I looked at the children playing in the yard, at the families who no longer lived in fear of eviction, and at the woman who was finally breathing the air of a world that had forgotten her. I felt the weight of the ID card in my pocket, the one that said, Chloe Davenport, Operations Manager. "You were wrong about one thing, Uncle," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. "What's that?" "My fortune isn't gone," I said, watching the sun set over the city I finally helped build. "I'm just getting started on the interest.